United States Navy is no stranger to insane boondoggles in the post-war era, and two of the biggest boondoggles of the Navy will be today's topic. Also, we'll discuss a big Navy program that is highly lethal, and not to our adversaries, but to our own U.S. soldiers, the United States Marines. We'll start with the Zumwalt destroyers, the newest class of ships in the Navy's fleet of large destroyers. The Zumwalts were designed primarily to protect our Marines if and when they arrive on an adversary's foreign shores by means of, well, probably amphibious boats. Protection for the Marines was to be accompanied by the Zumwalt ships shooting large bombs onto land from as far away as 70 miles from shore. 70 miles is too long a distance to effectively shoot a heavy projectile, of course, so the shells were built with small rocket motors to add boost and assist them on their way. The first of the three Zumwalt destroyers left the shipbuilding yard in 2013. Originally, the Navy had planned on having 22 of these ships, but for very alarming reasons, stopped after only 3 ships were completed at a cost of $8 billion each. That's $8,000 million apiece. In 2016, and this is 3 years after construction was completed on the first Zumwalt ship and months into its sea trials, the Navy sheepishly announced the very difficult decision to not purchase more military shells for the Zumwalts. Thereby, they basically disabled the combat function from all 3 of the Zumwalt ships. Obviously, you can't take a ship to war without it having weapons, so suddenly the 3 $8 billion Zumwalt ships were rendered useless. Unfortunately, the very complicated gun system designed especially for the Zumwalts could only use the artillery shell that was originally designed specifically for it. Early in the Zumwalt's design stage, and perhaps, well, probably to gain congressional approval, the shells were estimated to cost a measly $50,000 each, $50,000 apiece. But get this, at some point way late in the game, the only manufacturer of the shells, Lockheed Martin, wanted $800,000 per shell. Yes, they increased the price of that the Navy would have to pay for a shell by 16 times over the original cost estimate. The guns were designed to shoot 10 shells per minute. Just 1 minute of shooting, just 10 shells would cost $8 million of munitions. The ship's magazine had a capacity of 300 shells, which in continuous shooting would last 30 minutes and cost a whopping $240 million. With all the training and practice required to run these guns, that was more money than even the Navy could afford. Consequently, none of the 3 Zumwalt ships have ever been placed into active duty. They've been assigned crews, and maybe you've seen them out there sailing and burning up more money, but they've never been able to even defend themselves. In what appears to be mostly an effort to save face, the Navy has begun a program to remove the Zumwalt's big guns and replace them with guided missiles, which requires a major redesign of the ships. The work is currently in progress and will almost certainly cost taxpayers billions of dollars. Following the completion of the first Zumwalt ship, it took another 3 years before the Navy announced the ammunition problem. As far as I can find, no company, no group, no person has ever taken responsibility for this multi-billion-dollar mess. The elephant in the room, of course, is the logical question of who knew about this problem before it was announced, and when did they know? Did members of Congress know early enough that they could have stopped the construction of the Zumwalts before the more billions were spent? Admiral John Richardson was the Navy's chief in 2016. Wasn't he aware of the problem before this? How about Ash Carter, the Secretary of Defense in 2016? Was he sitting on this bombshell and saying nothing? Had the problem been addressed sooner, it would likely have saved us a lot of money. In any case, no one shoulders the blame. The first ship is now 12 years old, and none of the ships have ever been ready for combat. And the Zumwalt boondoggle continues. We'll leave it there and maybe hope for the best outcome of it. But we'll now move on to our next Navy boondoggle, which is the Littoral combat ship. Often referred to by its initials, LCS, the Littoral combat ship is much smaller than the big Zumwalt destroyers, but we've built many more of them, so it might be just even a bigger boondoggle than the Zumwalts. Originally, 55 Littoral combat ships were to be built, but the construction stopped at just 35 ships when way too many problems became apparent. The word littoral means close to shore. These ships are meant to operate in shallow waters in places where bigger ships such as destroyers and aircraft carriers can't operate. There are actually two variants of the Littoral combat ships. The two are quite similar, with the big difference being the design of the hull for each ship. What's known as the Freedom class has the standard type of hull that most ships have. What's known as the Independence class has an aluminum trimaran design similar to a catamaran, except the Independence class uses a main hull with smaller hulls on both sides. The Independence class ships are currently homeported in San Diego and serve the Pacific Ocean, while the Freedom class ships serve the Atlantic and are homeported in Mayport, Florida. With the background set, where do we start to unpeel this mess? It didn't take long for the LCS program to raise controversy. Our Navy's first LCS was commissioned in November 2008. In 2010, just the second year after the first LCS was commissioned, a report by the Pentagon's Director of Operational Test and Evaluation found that the ship was not expected to be survivable in a hostile combat environment, nor could it withstand Navy's shock trials for the ship. Since then, the complaints have only multiplied. ProPublica provides one list of the ship's issues, which include the following. One Navy secretary and his allies in Congress fought to build more Littoral combat ships, even as they broke down at sea and their weapons systems failed. The Navy wound up with more ships than it wanted at an estimated lifetime cost that could reach $100 billion or more. The Navy's haste to deliver ships took precedence over combat ability. Sailors and officers complained they spent more time fixing the ships than sailing them. Top Navy commanders placed pressure on subordinates to sail the ships even when the crews and vessels were not fully prepared to go to sea. Several major breakdowns in 2016 exposed the limits of the ships and their crews. And here's another list, a second list I've got. The items on this list are cost overruns, mechanical failures, operational challenges, which means the ships struggled to perform the missions they were intended for, and their reliability was often questionable. Structural integrity, which we'll get into in a moment. Mission module failures, early decommissioning and activation, reliance on contractors, and unclear design and rapid production. What? We are still feeding taxpayer money to the LCS boondoggle, and I'm talking about big money here. Just in the past 2 months, March and April 2025, the Department of Defense has given out 4 multi-million-dollar contracts for resurrecting the LCS program. Rolls-Royce Solutions America gets a $14 million contract, a modification, and this apparently is in addition to a contract that you'll see a figure you see about 7 lines down to. That was a $71 million contract. Next, General Dynamics gets awarded a $31 million contract for life cycle sustainment services in support of the Independence variant. Are they just trying to breathe some more life into this project? Northrop Grumman Systems is awarded a $59 million contract, and that's on top of a previously awarded contract for the same type of work. Huntington Ingalls, the big shipbuilder out of Mississippi, gets an $80 million contract, a modification to another previously awarded contract. So we have contracts of $14 million, $31 million, $59 million, and $80 million. And as bad as all this is, we haven't even gotten to what might be the biggest problem with the Littoral combat ships. The hulls of the Independence ships are cracking, and ships with hull cracks are suddenly limited to low sailing speeds and wave sizes. The ship's orders are, don't go fast and sail away from big waves. These two are unacceptable limitations for warships. The estimated lifetime cost of the LCS program is around $100 billion. When the Navy prematurely halted the ship's production run, some members of Congress called for even more LCS ships to be built, only because parts for the program were manufactured in their state. So far, 7 LCS ships have been decommissioned early, and there are plans for at least 3 more decommissionings. About a year ago, I read where the Defense Department had offered LCS ships to a South American country for free, but even that South American country refused to take one. As with the Zumwalt's problem, I haven't heard any company, organization, group, or person taking the blame for this boondoggle. Certainly the Navy had the final responsibility for approving the engineering plans and bears considerable responsibility, at least considerable responsibility, for the LCS boondoggle. Given the number of problems with the LCS program, it certainly appears that the Navy rushed the ship into production with no clear, real understanding of how the ships would be used. As if to keep the rug over this dirt, the Navy's website, navy.mil, gives a flowery description of the ship that contains no mention of the problems, just glowing prose designed to attract recruits. Once upon a time, our country was phenomenally efficient at shipbuilding. During World War II, the years 1941 to 1945, we built a total of 2,710 Liberty ships to haul cargo and troops from the United States to other continents where all-out war was erupting. That's nearly 3,000 ships built in a 5-year period. Many of these ships were built in less than 2 months. Obviously, today's Navy ships are much more complicated, but in any case, it's hard to reconcile our rather deplorable shipbuilding schedule and its frequent 3-year delays with what we were able to do 80 years ago with what were relatively crude tools and construction processes. We were building 2 Liberty ships every 3 days. Think about that. 2 Liberty ships were being completed every 3 days. Our final boondoggle is going to be a taxpayer-funded multi-billion-dollar Navy project that, if employed in real combat, could end up being a meat grinder for American soldiers. When it comes to amphibious warfare, many of us think back to the last time we made strong use of it, which was on the beaches of Normandy, France, on D-Day, June 6, 1944, during World War II. Our soldiers were delivered to Normandy's beaches in open boats and were shot at by our enemies using what today would be relatively primitive cannons and rifles. On just the first day of the invasion, there were over 10,000 Allied casualties. That day is immortalized in one of the most famous photos taken during World War II, and that photo shows soldiers leaving their amphibious boats and wading toward shore. Today, preparing our Marines to storm an adversary's beach is a surprisingly expensive and complicated process. The landing ships are delivered and launched to the area in the cargo areas of very large, very expensive ships that look like small aircraft carriers with flight decks for helicopters and vertical takeoff jets. While this is a modern and very costly program, our soldiers would still be in open boats and are nearly as vulnerable as what the U.S. used at Normandy 81 years ago. In a major skirmish, our soldiers and their boats would face an enemy equipped with sophisticated shoulder-fired missiles that are much more accurate and destructive than what was used at Normandy in 1944. Also, our adversaries might be using torpedoes shot from submarines. There's a very high chance that none of our boats or soldiers would make it to shore. It isn't easy to think of a realistic scenario in which an amphibious landing would not suffer extremely high casualties. On top of that, add in the factor that the amphibious program is expeditionary in nature and is not something we will ever use in protecting our own shores. There are just too many problems here to think that the Navy will make a serious course correction in the way it promotes new projects or designs and develops and constructs ships. There are no signs of present or future changes in the way that money passes from the defense industry into the open hands of our Congress members, contaminating the procurement process and paying for projects that are obsolete or unneeded, impractical, and of course, most often grossly overpriced. Nor is there any indication that our armed forces will stop ordering unnecessary, obscenely large, huge quantities of war machines available to them. As for the Navy's preparation for battle, imagine how they would fare in a battle for Taiwan within the range of mainland China's missiles and artillery. It seems as though the following changes are needed if we are to get our defense back on track. First change, remove the corporate bribery money currently contaminating our political process. This means outlawing corporate and other special interest money flowing to elected officials or any other person who has a political, economic, or financial interest in any government business. Secondly, form a nonpartisan coalition of our best military strategists who don't have conflicting interests and can guide our defense buildup so that we are properly defended, armed, and prepared for modern-day threats. Third, once we've devised the proper defense strategy, we need bright and honest people to implement and manage our defense programs. Fourth, make sure our government secrets, especially those regarding defense planning and other designs, project designs, are staying in our own possession and don't migrate to our adversaries. And we'll have more about that in a future segment. Unfortunately, these changes won't happen under bumbling, cartoonish wannabe figures or leaders like Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth, nor will the changes take place under our current United States Congress, most of whom have indeed proven that they will choose party over country when it comes to either money or following their leader. National defense is our government's biggest, most important function, and it is clearly in a major state of disarray right now. Making the required changes to our defense system will only take place when we change who runs Washington, D.C. Right now, our leadership is so inept that it is our very own leadership that is the biggest threat to our national security. All Americans need to get informed, and all Americans need to get out and vote. We can't afford to make the mistakes that we made in this previous election, for our country has never really been in a worse political situation, a more weakly defended state than it is now.